Story 1. The Singing Tunnel. Marcus Webb had been hauling freight through the Appalachian Mountains for 17 years, and Route 52 through southern West Virginia was as familiar to him as his own driveway. The narrow, two-lane highway, carved through dense forest and limestone hollows, passing through a dozen tunnels blasted through the mountain rock back in the 1950s. The Barlow Tunnel, at just over half a mile long, was unremarkable in every way. Straight shot, decent lighting, good drainage. Marcus had driven through it at least 3,000 times without incident. It was October 14th, 2019, around 2:47 a.m., when Marcus entered the Barlow Tunnel with a full load of manufacturing equipment headed for Bluefield. The night was clear, temperature hovering around 42 degrees, and his CB radio had been silent for the last hour. The tunnel's sodium lights flickered to life as his Peterbilt's headlights swept the entrance, illuminating the familiar concrete walls streaked with mineral deposits and decades of diesel exhaust stains. About 30 seconds into the tunnel, Marcus noticed something different. The usual hollow echo of his engine seemed muffled, dampened somehow, as if the air itself had grown thicker. He checked his mirrors, nothing behind him, which was normal for this time of night. The tunnel stretched ahead, lights creating pools of amber in the darkness, everything appearing exactly as it always did. Then he heard the singing. At first, Marcus thought it was interference on his CB, even though the radio was off. The sound was faint, distant, like a choir singing from somewhere far away. The melody was old-fashioned, something that reminded him of the hymns his grandmother used to sing at the Baptist church back in Beckley. He reached for the CB dial, confirmed it was definitely off, then checked his phone. No signal, which was normal in the tunnel. The singing grew louder as he drove deeper into the tunnel. It wasn't coming from his radio or phone. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, seeming to emanate from the tunnel walls themselves. Multiple voices, maybe a dozen or more, harmonizing in a language Marcus didn't recognize. Not quite English, not quite anything else. The melody was beautiful and deeply unsettling, carrying an emotional weight that made his chest feel tight. Marcus pressed harder on the accelerator. The tunnel should have ended by now. He'd been driving for at least 2 minutes, maybe longer. The Barlow Tunnel was only half a mile long, which meant at his speed he should have emerged already. But the amber lights kept stretching ahead, concrete walls flowing past in an endless gray river. The singing intensified. Now Marcus could distinguish individual voices, a woman's soprano rising above the others, a bass rumble underneath that felt like it was vibrating through his seat. The melody had shifted, becoming more urgent, more insistent. The words, though still incomprehensible, seemed to be calling something, beckoning something forth. Marcus glanced at his odometer. He'd traveled 1.3 miles since entering the tunnel. Impossible. The Barlow Tunnel was 0.6 miles long. He checked his speedometer, 55 miles per hour, steady. His GPS showed nothing but a gray screen with signal lost flashing in the corner. The temperature inside the cab had dropped noticeably. Marcus could see his breath now, despite the heater running full blast. The singing had evolved into something that no longer sounded entirely human. The harmonies were too perfect, the pitch ranges too wide. Some of the voices were hitting notes that seemed to exist in spaces between normal musical tones, creating dissonances that made Marcus's teeth ache. Then he saw the figures. They appeared first as shadows against the tunnel walls, keeping pace with his truck despite his speed. Tall, impossibly elongated silhouettes that seemed to glide rather than walk. As Marcus stared in horror, the shadows began to pull away from the walls, becoming three-dimensional forms that floated alongside his truck. They had the rough shape of people, but stretched and distorted, with limbs too long and heads tilted at angles that human necks couldn't manage. The figures were singing. Their mouths, if they could be called mouths, opened wide enough to show darkness within darkness. The sound poured out of them like water, filling the tunnel with such volume that Marcus's windshield began to vibrate. He pressed the accelerator to the floor, his Peterbilt's diesel engine roaring, but the figures kept pace effortlessly. Marcus's odometer read 2.7 miles now. He'd been in the tunnel for over 5 minutes. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as the singing reached a crescendo that seemed designed to split reality itself. The tunnel lights began to flicker in rhythm with the music, creating a strobe effect that made the floating figures appear to move in jerky, impossible ways. One of the figures passed directly through the side of his cab. The temperature plummeted to what felt like below freezing. Marcus's breath came out in thick white clouds as the figure materialized in the passenger seat, a translucent, elongated form that seemed to be made of compacted shadow and moonlight. It turned its head toward Marcus, and though it had no visible eyes, he felt its gaze penetrate through him. The figure opened its mouth and sang a single note that seemed to last forever, a sound that carried within it every sad thing Marcus had ever experienced, every loss and regret and moment of despair. Tears streamed down Marcus's face without his permission. The note resonated with something deep in his chest, something fundamental to his existence. He felt himself beginning to hum along, his own voice joining the chorus against his will. The figure reached out one impossibly long hand toward Marcus's face. Then, abruptly, the tunnel ended. Marcus exploded out into the night air, his truck rocketing forward as if shot from a cannon. The singing cut off instantly, leaving a silence so profound it hurt. The figure in his passenger seat was gone. His speedometer showed 78 miles per hour. He'd apparently been accelerating the entire time. Marcus slammed on his brakes, bringing the Peterbilt to a shuddering halt on the shoulder of the highway. He sat there for 20 minutes, engine idling, heater gradually warming the cab back to normal temperature. His hands eventually stopped shaking enough to check the time. 2:51 a.m. Only 4 minutes had passed since he'd entered the tunnel. According to his odometer, he'd traveled 0.7 miles, just slightly more than the tunnel's actual length. Marcus called his dispatcher on his cell phone, which suddenly had full signal. He reported a mechanical issue and said he needed to take an unscheduled break. Then he pulled up Google Maps and searched for the Barlow Tunnel. The information panel showed it had been built in 1953, which he knew. But there was another piece of information he'd never heard before. The tunnel had been constructed through a mountainside that was previously the site of the Barlow Hollow Church and Cemetery, established in 1847 and buried in a landslide in 1952 that killed 43 people during Sunday services. Marcus sat in his cab as dawn slowly brightened the eastern sky. He thought about those 43 people, buried alive under tons of rock and soil. He thought about how, a year later, construction crews had blasted that same mountainside to create a tunnel. He thought about the singing, those perfect, impossible harmonies, and the figure that had shared his cab for those eternal seconds. He continued his route to Bluefield, delivered his load, and drove back through the Barlow Tunnel in full daylight. It looked exactly as it always had, a concrete tube through the mountain, unremarkable and utilitarian. But Marcus requested route changes after that. He told his dispatcher it was to save time, to avoid the narrow mountain roads. He never mentioned that he would drive 100 miles out of his way to avoid that half-mile stretch of highway. At night, sometimes, Marcus still hears the singing in his dreams. That same beautiful, terrible melody calling from somewhere deep beneath the mountain. He wakes up and finds himself humming along, his voice joining a chorus that should not exist. And every time he passes a tunnel now, any tunnel, he holds his breath until he emerges back into the light, terrified of what might be singing in the darkness, waiting for someone to hear their song. Story 2. The repeating rest stop. Janet Rodriguez had been driving long haul for 12 years when she encountered the rest stop that wouldn't let her leave. The incident occurred on November 3, 2021, along Interstate 77 in Virginia, where the highway cuts through the Appalachian highlands in a series of long grades and sweeping curves. Janet was hauling automotive parts from Charlotte to Cleveland, running through the night to avoid traffic and make her delivery window. Around 11:30 p.m., she pulled into the Big Walker Mountain Rest Area, a standard Virginia Dotee facility with restrooms, vending machines, and parking for about 20 vehicles. The rest stop was nearly empty, just 2 other trucks in the lot and a sedan parked near the building. Janet needed to use the restroom and refill her coffee thermos. The air was cold and damp, with fog settling into the valleys, reducing visibility to maybe 50 yards. The rest stop looked exactly like dozens of others Janet had visited. Brick building with fluorescent lights, picnic tables on a concrete pad, informational signs about local attractions. She spent maybe 10 minutes inside, used the facilities, filled her thermos from the hot water dispenser for instant coffee, and checked her phone messages. Nothing unusual. She walked back to her Freightliner Cascadia, climbed in, started the engine, and pulled back onto I-77 North. 15 minutes later, she pulled into the Big Walker Mountain Rest Area again. At first, Janet thought she'd gotten confused, maybe taken an exit loop incorrectly. But her GPS clearly showed her traveling north on I-77. No detours, no exits taken. Yet here was the same brick building, the same fluorescent lights, the same picnic tables. Even the same sedan was parked in the same spot, though the 2 other trucks were gone. Janet felt a prickle of unease but rationalized it. Maybe there were 2 identical rest stops along this stretch. Virginia did sometimes use standardized designs. She checked her GPS again. The app showed she was 14.3 miles north of where she'd stopped before. That didn't make sense given the time and her speed, but GPS could be glitchy in the mountains. She decided to keep driving without stopping. As she pulled back onto the highway, she made note of the mile marker, 47. The next rest stop, according to her atlas, shouldn't be for another 38 miles. She settled in, watching the mile markers count upward. 48, 49, 50. The highway unreeled before her headlights, fog swirling in patches, the dark mass of mountains pressing close on both sides. At mile marker 63, she saw the Big Walker Mountain Rest Area sign illuminated in her headlights. Janet's heart rate kicked up. This wasn't possible. She'd driven 16 miles, and here was the same rest stop again. Same building, same lights, same sedan in the parking lot. She grabbed her CB radio and called out, "Any drivers near Big Walker Mountain on I-77, come back." Static answered her. She tried again. Nothing. According to her CB, there should be plenty of traffic on this route, even at night. But the radio remained silent, except for the hiss of empty channels. Janet didn't stop this time. She accelerated past the rest stop, watching her speedometer climb to 75. The mile markers continued counting up. 64, 65. The fog grew thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 30 yards. Her headlights created a tunnel of light in the white murk, and the reflective markers on the roadside were the only indication she was still on pavement. 71, 72, 73. The Big Walker Mountain rest area appeared again in her headlights. Same building, same sedan. The lights seemed brighter now, more insistent, like they were calling to her. Janet felt genuine fear now. She checked her fuel gauge, 3/4 full, plenty to keep driving. Her GPS had frozen, showing a gray screen with a spinning loading icon. Her phone showed no signal. The CB remained silent. She was utterly alone on a highway that kept returning her to the same impossible location. She drove past the rest stop again, this time pushing her speed to 80. The mile markers became a blur. The fog pressed closer, seeming to follow her now, tendrils of white mist reaching toward her truck like fingers. She counted markers compulsively. 74, 80, 90, 100. The rest stop appeared again. Janet slammed on her brakes, bringing her Freightliner to a shuddering stop in the middle of the highway. Her breath came in short gasps. According to her odometer, she'd driven nearly 40 miles since first trying to leave the rest stop. But here it was again, exactly the same. The sedan still sitting in that same parking spot. That sedan. Something about it nagged at Janet's mind. She'd seen that car now 4 times, always in the exact same position, as if it had been painted onto the scene rather than parked there. Making a decision, Janet pulled into the rest stop and parked directly behind the sedan, blocking it in. She approached the vehicle cautiously. It was a dark blue Honda Accord, maybe 10 years old, covered in road dust. The windows were tinted, making it hard to see inside. Janet knocked on the driver's window. No response. She tried the door handle, unlocked. The interior was empty. Completely empty. No seats, no dashboard, no steering wheel. Just a hollow shell of a car with windows and doors. Janet stumbled backward, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. The sedan wasn't real. It was a prop, a stage piece, part of whatever impossible scenario she'd been trapped in. She ran back to her truck and sat in the cab, locking the doors. The rest stop looked different now that she knew it wasn't real. The lights were too uniform, too perfect. The fog moved around the building in ways that didn't follow any wind patterns. And the building itself, when Janet really looked at it, she realized there were no shadows. The fluorescent lights illuminated everything evenly, flatly, like a photograph rather than a physical space. Janet made a decision. She started her truck, put it in gear, and instead of returning to the highway, she drove directly across the parking lot, over the curb, and into the grass beyond. She'd noticed earlier that the rest area backed up to dense forest. If she couldn't escape via the highway, maybe she could escape another way. Her Freightliner bounced over rough ground, headlights cutting through the fog as she pushed into the trees. Branches scraped along the trailer, and she heard the crunch of underbrush beneath her wheels. The fog grew impossibly thick, reducing visibility to less than 10 feet. Janet kept driving, steering around larger trees, pushing deeper into the forest that shouldn't exist beside an interstate highway. Then the trees ended, and she was on pavement again. Highway pavement, I-77. But something was different. The fog was gone. The air was clear, stars visible overhead. Janet checked her GPS. It showed her location as I-77 northbound, mile marker 104. She'd somehow traveled 60 miles from the rest stop. Her clock showed 1:17 a.m. Nearly 2 hours had passed. Janet drove for another 20 minutes in stunned silence before seeing another rest area ahead. The Fancy Gap Rest Area, according to the sign. She pulled in, hands shaking, and found a parking spot among a dozen other trucks. Real trucks, she could tell, because their engines ticked with cooling metal, and she could see drivers moving around inside the cabs. She approached another trucker, an older man with a gray beard, who was checking his tire pressure. "Excuse me," Janet said, her voice hoarse. "Have you been through the Big Walker Mountain Rest Area tonight?" The man looked at her oddly. "Big Walker? That rest area's been closed for 3 years, hun. They shut it down after some structural issues with the building. Planning to reopen it next spring, last I heard." Janet returned to her truck and searched for Big Walker Mountain Rest Area on her phone. The first result was a Virginia DOT maintenance notice. Big Walker Mountain Rest Area. Closed until further notice. Facility closure date, August 2018. She pulled up Google Street View and navigated to the rest area's location. The images showed a deteriorating building with plywood over the windows, cracked pavement sprouting weeds, and no cars in the parking lot. No sedan, no lights, just abandonment and decay. Janet completed her run to Cleveland in a haze, delivered her load, and told her dispatcher she needed a few days off for personal reasons. She drove that stretch of I-77 again 6 months later, in broad daylight, and found the Big Walker Mountain Rest Area exactly as Google had shown it. Closed, decaying, clearly abandoned for years. But at night, sometimes, when Janet is driving through the Appalachian Mountains on some other highway, she'll see rest stops that look a little too perfect, a little too bright, and she'll notice cars in the parking lots that sit in positions too precise, too staged. She never stops at those rest areas. She drives past them and doesn't look in her mirrors because she's afraid she'll see herself pulling in, beginning the loop all over again. The CB radio crackles sometimes on those nights, voices talking about a rest stop that won't let them leave, asking if anyone knows how to escape. Janet never responds. She just keeps driving, mile markers counting upward, hoping they continue to count upward, terrified of the moment they might start counting down. Story 3. The Road That Changed. Thomas Brennan was a regional driver for a lumber company, hauling loads between mills in eastern Kentucky and western North Carolina. He'd been driving a particular route for 8 years, US 421 from Harlan to Boone, a winding mountain road that required careful attention, but offered no particular challenges to an experienced driver. On March 19, 2020, Thomas made that drive for the 1,000th time and discovered that the road had changed. He left Harlan at 4:30 a.m. with a full load of kiln-dried oak, planning to arrive in Boone by 11 a.m. The weather was clear, temperature in the mid-40s, with dawn beginning to lighten the eastern sky. US 421 climbed out of Harlan in a series of switchbacks, then settled into a rhythmic pattern of curves, following the mountain ridges. Thomas knew every turn, every grade, every sight line along the route. About an hour into the drive, as full daylight spread across the mountains, Thomas noticed something odd. There was a curve ahead that he didn't recognize, a sharp left-hand bend around a rocky outcropping. He slowed down, confused. This section of road should be a gentle right curve following a ridgeline. But there it was, clear as day, a left turn with warning signs and chevron markers. Thomas navigated the curve carefully, and as he came around the outcropping, he found himself on a stretch of highway he'd never seen before. The pavement was older, cracked and patched, with faded yellow lines. The trees pressing close to the roadside were different, more oak and hickory, fewer pines than he remembered, and the road signs were wrong. A green mileage sign indicated Pineville 23 miles. That wasn't right. Pineville was nowhere near this route. It was a town Thomas knew, but it sat along US 25E, a completely different highway, at least 30 miles west of where he should be. Thomas pulled over onto a gravel turnout and checked his GPS. The screen showed his location on US 421, exactly where he should be. But the map displayed around his position didn't match what he was seeing. The GPS showed him on a ridgeline section of highway with no sharp curves, while his actual surroundings showed him in a valley with steep mountains rising on both sides. He stepped out of his cab, breathing in the cool mountain air. The trees were budding, which was right for mid-March, but something about them looked wrong. The patterns were different, the spacing too uniform, as if they'd been planted rather than growing wild. And the mountains themselves, their shapes were subtly incorrect, peaks and ridges in configurations that didn't match his memory. Thomas got back in his truck and continued driving. Maybe he'd gotten confused, taken a wrong turn without realizing it, but that didn't make sense. He'd been paying attention, and there were no turns to take on that section of US 421. The road simply went forward. After 10 minutes of driving, he passed through a small town. A faded sign read, Loyal, Kentucky, population 853. Thomas had never heard of Loyal. He'd driven US 421 hundreds of times and never passed through any town by that name. The town was small, maybe 24 buildings clustered around the highway, a post office, a closed gas station, a few houses. No people were visible, which wasn't unusual for an early Thursday morning in a rural area. But as Thomas drove through Loyal, he noticed more wrongness. The architecture was dated, buildings that looked like they were from the 1960s, with metal signs and storefront designs from that era. Not preserved or maintained, but genuinely old, as if the town had been built 60 years ago and never updated. No satellite dishes on the houses, no modern cars parked on the streets, just silence and emptiness and a profound sense of abandonment. Thomas accelerated through the town, unease building in his chest. US 421 climbed back into the mountains, winding through forest that grew darker and denser. The sun, which should have been rising higher in the eastern sky, seemed stuck at dawn levels, casting long shadows that didn't move as Thomas drove. After another 20 minutes, he encountered the tunnel. Thomas knew every tunnel on his regular routes. There was no tunnel on US 421 between Harlan and Boone. Yet here it was. A single lane bore through solid rock, with crumbling concrete around the entrance, and no lights visible inside. A weathered sign read, Big Black Mountain Tunnel, narrow clearance, trucks use caution. Thomas stopped his truck 50 feet from the tunnel entrance. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles turned white. This was wrong. This was all wrong. He'd driven this route 1,000 times, and there was no tunnel. There was no town called Loyal. There was no valley in this location. He pulled out his phone to call his dispatcher. No signal. He tried his CB radio, scanning through channels, static on every frequency. He checked his GPS again, still showing him on US 421. But the map had changed. The route now showed features that weren't there before. The tunnel, the valley, the town. As if reality itself was rewriting his GPS data to match this impossible road. Thomas looked in his mirrors, considering turning around. Behind him, the highway stretched back the way he'd come, winding between dark trees. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the far distance, maybe half a mile back, he could see a truck. His truck. The same red Peterbilt, the same lumber load. And it was driving toward him, moving slowly but steadily, following the same route he'd just taken. He spun around to look forward again. The tunnel entrance yawned before him, dark and uninviting. But behind him, his own truck was approaching, driven by some version of himself who was trapped in the same loop. Thomas realized that if he turned around, he might meet himself. The thought filled him with existential dread he couldn't fully articulate. With no good options, Thomas chose forward. He started his engine, turned on his headlights, and approached the tunnel. The entrance was narrower than modern standards, probably built in the 1940s or 50s when vehicles were smaller. His mirrors would clear the sides with maybe 6 inches to spare on each side. The tunnel swallowed him. Thomas's headlights barely penetrated the darkness, showing wet stone walls and a floor covered with debris and standing water. The tunnel was longer than it had appeared from outside. He drove for 3 minutes at 25 miles per hour without seeing the exit. Water dripped from the ceiling, splattering his windshield. His engine noise echoed strangely, creating harmonics that sounded almost like voices. Then, ahead, he saw light. Not the gray light of day, but a bright white glow that grew more intense as he approached. Thomas shielded his eyes with one hand, squinting against the glare. The tunnel exit emerged, but beyond it wasn't the mountains he expected. It was light. Pure, featureless white light that seemed to contain nothing and everything simultaneously. Thomas drove out of the tunnel and into the light. For an immeasurable moment, he existed in whiteness. No road, no truck, no self. Just awareness floating in absence. Then, like a film reel snapping back into motion, reality reasserted itself. Thomas found himself on US 441, exactly where he should be according to his schedule. The familiar ridgeline section, pine trees, clear sky. His GPS showed normal data. His clock showed 7:47 a.m. The right amount of time had passed since leaving Harlan. And ahead, he could see the landmarks he knew. The overlook at Devil's Racetrack, the long grade down toward Tennessee. He completed the drive to Boone in a daze, delivered his load, and checked into a motel room where he spent 6 hours searching online for any mention of Loyal, Kentucky, or the Big Black Mountain Tunnel. He found nothing. No town by that name in any database. No tunnel on US 421 in any historical records. But then he searched for Big Black Mountain Tunnel, Kentucky, without the highway designation. And he found something. A paragraph in a 1947 engineering journal describing a proposed tunnel through Big Black Mountain along a route that was never completed. The project was abandoned after the primary contractor died under mysterious circumstances, and the partially completed tunnel was sealed and forgotten. Thomas found one grainy photograph in a historical archive, a black and white image from 1947, showing the tunnel entrance. It matched exactly what he'd seen. Behind the tunnel in the photograph, barely visible, was a small town. The photo's caption read, Loyal, KY, prior to relocation for Black Mountain Tunnel Project. Thomas never drove US 421 again. He requested route changes, accepting the longer driving times and reduced pay. His dispatcher thought he was being difficult and eventually let him go. Thomas found work with a different company, driving routes that stayed in the flatlands, far from the mountains. But sometimes, late at night when he can't sleep, Thomas searches for that road again. He'll plot routes on GPS apps, looking for the combination of turns and landmarks that might lead him back to that impossible highway. He's never found it again. The road that changed has stayed changed, existing somewhere beside the normal world, waiting for another driver to make a wrong turn that isn't wrong, to find themselves on a highway that leads through tunnels of light into places that cartographers never mapped and engineers never built. Story 4. The Hitchhiker Who Knew. Daniel Patterson had picked up hitchhikers exactly 3 times in his 19-year trucking career, all on the same stretch of mountain highway in Virginia. Each encounter lasted less than an hour, and each one convinced him that there are things traveling the Appalachian roads that aren't quite human, aren't quite anything that should exist. The first incident occurred on September 11th, 2017, along Route 460 near Paint Bank. Daniel was heading east with a load of agricultural equipment, making good time in clear weather. Around 9:30 p.m., his headlights picked out a figure standing beside the road at a pull-off. A woman in dark clothing, thumb out, the universal gesture of hitches. Daniel normally never stopped for hitches. Company policy strictly forbade it, and common sense reinforced the rule. But something about this woman made him slow down. Maybe it was how still she stood, like a statue in the darkness. Or maybe it was the complete absence of any vehicle nearby, broken down or otherwise. She was simply there, alone, 30 miles from the nearest town, in either direction. Against his better judgment, Daniel pulled over. He opened his passenger window and leaned across. "You okay? Need me to call someone for you?" The woman approached his truck. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back and pale skin that seemed almost luminous in his cab lights. She wore jeans and a button-up shirt that looked normal enough, but something about her was off. Her movements were slightly wrong, as if she was puppeteering her own body rather than moving naturally. "I need a ride," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Just to the next junction. 23 minutes. The specificity of 23 minutes struck Daniel as odd. "Where exactly are you trying to get to?" "The next junction, where routes intersect." She placed one hand on his passenger door handle. "I need to be there in 23 minutes. It's important that you understand this." Every instinct Daniel had screamed at him to drive away, but his hand reached out and unlocked the door anyway. The woman climbed into his cab with movements that were too smooth, too fluid. She settled into the passenger seat and turned to face forward, hands folded in her lap. Daniel pulled back onto the highway, glancing at his passenger. Up close, the wrongness was more apparent. Her skin had no pores, no visible texture. Her eyes didn't blink, and when she breathed, if she was breathing, her chest didn't move. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, trying to break the silence. "Names aren't useful here," the woman replied. "But you can call me Sarah if it makes you more comfortable. That's a name I've used before." "Sarah. Okay, I'm Daniel." "I know." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How do you know?" "I know many things about you, Daniel Patterson. You were born in Roanoke on July 3rd, 1973. You have 2 daughters, Ashley and Morgan. You've been driving trucks since 1998. You're afraid of heights, but hide it well. You almost died in 2003 when a car ran a red light in Knoxville. But the timing was wrong by 2 seconds, so you lived." Sarah's voice remained flat, reciting facts like reading from a database. "How the hell do you know all that?" Daniel's voice came out higher than he intended. "Because I've been here before. I've ridden in this truck with you before. This conversation, we've had it 7 times now. You always ask how I know. I always answer the same way. Then you ask why you don't remember, and I tell you the truth." Daniel's mouth felt dry. "Okay, why don't I remember?" "Because after I exit your truck in," Sarah glanced at the dashboard clock, 18 minutes, you'll forget this encounter. You'll retain no conscious memory of stopping for me, of this conversation, of anything I tell you. This is the 8th iteration. Each time you stop. Each time you give me a ride. Each time you forget. The highway unreeled before Daniel's headlights, the mountains dark masses against the starlit sky. He wanted to throw this woman, this thing, out of his truck, but something kept him driving. If I forget, why do you keep doing this? What's the point? Because I'm not here for you to remember, Sarah said. I'm here to ensure you arrive at the junction in exactly 16 minutes. There's a minivan that will run the red light at that intersection. If you arrive on schedule, you'll pass through 3 seconds after the minivan. The family inside, parents, 2 children, will survive. If you're early or late, the timing changes. People die. Daniel felt ice spread through his chest. You're telling me I'm part of some plan, some predetermined timeline. Not predetermined, carefully arranged. There are many of us who travel these roads, Daniel. We don't control fate. We adjust timing. Small changes measured in seconds. We make sure specific people are in specific places at specific moments. You've helped me do this 7 times before. Tonight is the 8th. Why me? Why this truck? Because your truck has a specific velocity curve on this highway. I've studied your driving patterns. You maintain 63 miles per hour on straight sections, decelerate to 51 on sharp curves, accelerate at a consistent rate. You're predictable, which makes you useful. And Sarah turned to look at him for the first time, her unblinking eyes reflecting his cab lights. You're someone who will stop for a hitchhiker, despite knowing you shouldn't. They drove in silence for several minutes. Daniel's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. Part of him insisted this was insane, impossible. But another part, the part that had lived through strange things on lonely highways, believed her completely. What are you? Daniel finally asked. Something that exists in the margins, between cause and effect, between what is and what might be. The roads through these mountains are old, Daniel. They follow routes that things other than humans used long before asphalt existed. Some of us still travel those routes, making sure the timings align, keeping the world running along its proper track. The junction appeared ahead, a 4-way intersection with a single traffic light, glowing red in the darkness. Daniel checked his clock. 9:53 p.m. According to Sarah's original statement, they'd arrive exactly on schedule. Stop here, Sarah said, when they were still 200 yards from the intersection. Let me out. Daniel pulled onto the shoulder. The traffic light turned green for his direction as he stopped. Sarah opened the passenger door and stepped down with that same fluid, wrong motion. She turned to look back at him. Drive through when the light turns green again, she said. Maintain your normal speed. Don't accelerate. Don't hesitate. The timing must be precise. Wait, Daniel said. Will I see you again? Yes. In approximately 4 years. Same highway, different location. I'll need your help adjusting another timing. She paused, her expressionless face somehow conveying something that might have been sadness. I'm sorry you have to forget, but that's part of the arrangement. The work happens in the spaces between memory. Sarah closed the door and walked into the darkness beyond the road shoulder. Within 3 steps, she'd vanished completely, as if absorbed by the night itself. Daniel sat at the roadside for a moment, his heart pounding. The traffic lights cycled, yellow, red, green. He put his truck in gear and pulled forward, approaching the intersection at exactly 63 miles per hour. The light was green. He entered the intersection. A minivan shot through from his left, running the red light. Daniel glimpsed faces inside. A man driving, a woman in the passenger seat, children in the back. The minivan missed his front bumper by maybe 10 feet, close enough that Daniel felt his truck rock in its wake. The minivan's brake, lights flared as the driver realized what had happened. Then it continued on, disappearing down the cross street. Daniel completed his turn and continued east on Route 460. His heart gradually slowed to normal rhythm. He drove for another hour before stopping at a rest area for coffee and to settle his nerves. While standing at the vending machine, Daniel tried to remember why he felt so unsettled. Something had happened, something significant, but the memory was like trying to grab smoke. There was an intersection, and a woman. No, that didn't make sense. He hadn't picked up any passengers. He'd been alone in his truck all evening. Daniel shook his head and bought his coffee. The feeling of unease faded as he returned to his truck and resumed driving. By the time he reached his destination, he'd forgotten the incident entirely. It settled into the blank space in his memory where the other 7 encounters had gone, locked away until the next time. The second encounter happened on March 28th, 2021. Same highway, different location. Daniel stopped for a man standing beside the road at night, something he never did, except when he did. The man climbed into his truck and told him about a tractor trailer that would jackknife 7 miles ahead unless Daniel delayed his arrival by 90 seconds. They talked about fate and timing and the spaces between moments. Then Daniel let the man out, forgot everything, and drove forward, watching an 18-wheeler slide harmlessly off the road in the exact spot where Daniel would have been if he'd maintained his normal pace. The third encounter occurred on September 11th, 2024. A woman flagged him down, young, dark hair, pale skin. Daniel felt a strange sense of déjà vu as she climbed into his truck, but he couldn't place why she seemed familiar. She told him they'd met before, that they'd meet again. She spoke of the roads through the mountains and the things that traveled them, adjusting timing, keeping the world aligned. She told him about the minivan he'd nearly hit 7 years ago, and Daniel found himself believing her, despite having no memory of the event. "Why are you telling me this if I'm just going to forget again?" Daniel asked. "Because the 9th time will be different," Sarah said. "The 9th time, you'll remember. That's when you'll have to make a choice, to continue helping, knowing what you are, or to refuse. I'm preparing you, planting seeds that will blossom when the time comes. You'll forget the details, but something will remain. A foundation." She had him stop at another junction, gave him timing instructions, and disappeared into the darkness. Daniel drove through at precisely the right moment, and somewhere in the complex web of causality, someone lived who might have died, or died who might have lived. The universe adjusted itself by seconds. Daniel forgot. But Sarah was right. Something remained. As he drove away, Daniel found himself thinking about the roads through, the mountains, and the things that traveled them. He found himself noticing hitchhikers he'd never stopped for before, wondering what they might tell him if he picked them up. He found himself questioning the nature of coincidence and the precision of timing. And deep in his memory, in the spaces between consciousness and dream, 8 encounters waited to resurface. The 9th iteration was coming. Sarah had promised him that much. And when it arrived, Daniel Patterson would finally remember every moment of every ride, and he would have to choose whether to continue serving as a timing mechanism in a system he didn't understand, or to refuse and let the timings fall where they may. The mountains kept their secrets. The roads wound through darkness. And somewhere in the night, Sarah and others like her stood beside highways, thumbs out, waiting for drivers who would stop, despite knowing they shouldn't, ready to adjust the world's timing one ride at a time. Story 5. The Fog with Faces. Raymond Torres had been driving dedicated routes for a building materials supplier for 15 years, and he'd seen every kind of weather the Appalachian Mountains could produce. Ice storms that turned highways into skating rinks, thunderstorms with lightning that struck so close his hair stood up, and fog so dense that 20 feet of visibility was optimistic. But on April 6th, 2022, Raymond drove through fog that looked back at him, and nothing in his experience had prepared him for that. The route was familiar. Interstate 26 through North Carolina and into Tennessee, a run Raymond made twice weekly. He'd departed from Asheville at 5:45 a.m. with a full load of drywall and insulation, planning to reach Johnson City by 8:30. The weather forecast had mentioned morning fog in the mountain valleys, nothing unusual for early April. The fog started appearing around 6:20 a.m., right after Raymond entered a long valley section where the interstate dropped to follow a creek bed. It came up suddenly, as mountain fog often does, rising from the creek like smoke. Within minutes, visibility dropped from miles to maybe 50 feet. Raymond slowed to 45 miles per hour and turned on his fog lights, their amber glow barely penetrating the white wall surrounding his truck. Nothing unusual yet, just thick fog requiring careful driving. Raymond had done this countless times. He kept his eyes on the road markings, watching for the reflective paint to guide him through the murk. His CB radio crackled occasionally with other drivers reporting conditions, everyone slowing down, taking it easy. Then Raymond noticed the shapes. At first, he thought they were trees beside the highway, dark forms visible through the fog. But the shapes moved, keeping pace with his truck. Raymond focused on one of the forms, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was roughly person-sized and person-shaped, but the details were wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that didn't bend at normal, joint angles. The shape turned to face his truck. Raymond saw what might have been a face, two darker spots that could be eyes, a vertical line that might be a mouth. The fog swirled around the figure, through the figure, as if it wasn't quite solid, but rather made of the same substance as the fog itself. The face, if it was a face, tracked Raymond's truck as he passed. Raymond's hands gripped the steering wheel harder. He told himself it was pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns. The fog was just fog, and his tired brain was manufacturing meaning from meaningless shapes. But even as he thought this, he saw more figures, dozens of them, lining both sides of the highway, all turning to watch his truck pass. The fog grew denser. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. The faces in the fog became clearer, more defined. Raymond could see expressions now, not emotions exactly, but configurations of features that suggested interest, curiosity, hunger. The figures pressed closer to the highway, as if approaching to get a better view. Raymond's CB crackled. "Any trucks in the fog on 26? Y'all seeing this?" A voice tight with tension. Raymond grabbed his mic. "Seeing what? The heavy fog?" "The faces, man. The fog's got faces in it. I've been driving for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Another voice joined. "I see them too. Jesus Christ, what are they?" Raymond felt a wave of relief that he wasn't hallucinating, followed immediately by terror that whatever he was seeing was real enough for multiple people to perceive. "Where are you guys? Maybe we should convoy through this." "I'm at mile marker 91, westbound," the first voice said. Raymond checked his position. "I'm at 88, eastbound." I'm 94 westbound, the third voice added. And guys, they're getting closer. The faces, they're not just shapes in the fog anymore. They're distinct, individual, and they're moving toward the road. Raymond looked at the figures lining his route. The third driver was right. They were closer now, maybe only 10 feet from the roadside, and getting nearer. The fog swirled and eddied, but the faces remained stable within it, suggesting that the faces weren't just patterns in random vapor, but something with structure and intention. One of the figures stepped onto the highway. Raymond saw it clearly despite the fog. A humanoid form made of compressed mist, translucent but defined, standing directly in his lane about 40 feet ahead. He hit his brakes, feeling his trailer start to slide on the damp pavement. The figure didn't move as Raymond's truck bore down on it. At the last second, Raymond jerked the wheel to the left, crossing into the westbound lane to avoid the figure. His truck passed through the figure. For a brief moment, Raymond was inside the fog being. The temperature in his cab plummeted. The air grew thick and hard to breathe, like trying to inhale water vapor. And he heard voices, not words exactly, but impressions of communication, thousands of whispers overlapping, saying things in languages Raymond didn't understand. The whispers filled his head, his chest, his entire body, pressing against his consciousness like waves. Then he was through, back into the fog, the figure behind him. Raymond gasped for air, his breath visible in the suddenly freezing cab. He grabbed his CB. Don't drive through them. I repeat, don't drive through the figures. Something happens if you... His CB died. The screen went dark, along with his dashboard lights. His engine kept running, but every electrical system in his truck had failed. His GPS was dead. His phone showed no signal and wouldn't respond to inputs. Even his watch had stopped, the digital display frozen at 6:34 a.m. The fog pressed closer, now so dense that Raymond could barely see his hood. And the faces, there were hundreds of them now, maybe thousands, pressing against his windshield, their translucent features mere inches from the glass. Some had mouths open as if speaking or screaming silently. Others had their hands, if the limb extensions could be called hands, pressed against the glass, leaving no marks, no condensation, just the visual impression of contact. Raymond kept driving because stopping seemed worse. His speed had dropped to maybe 20 miles per hour, guided only by the faint impression of the road beneath his wheels. The faces watched him, their dark eye spots following his movements. Some of the figures kept pace with his truck, floating alongside, matching his speed effortlessly. One of the faces pressed through the windshield. Raymond shouted and jerked backward in his seat as a translucent face pushed through the glass without breaking it, emerging into his cab like something passing through a membrane. The face was inches from his own, close enough that he could see it was composed of tiny droplets of water held in a pattern by something that wasn't physical force. The eyes were voids, deeper than darkness, and looking into them gave Raymond a sensation of falling through endless space. The face opened its mouth. Fog poured out, filling the cab. Raymond couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The temperature dropped even further. He could feel ice forming in his beard, in his eyebrows. His lungs burned as he tried to draw breath and inhaled only frozen vapor. Then, abruptly, the fog was gone. Raymond exploded out of the dense bank and into clear morning air. The sun was above the eastern horizon, brightening the sky. The road ahead was empty and visible for miles. He was still on I-26, still heading toward Tennessee. His dashboard lights flickered and came back on. His CB crackled to life with normal traffic chatter. His watch showed 6:47 a.m. Raymond pulled onto the shoulder, shaking violently. He sat there for 20 minutes, heater blasting, trying to warm up and process what had happened. Eventually, he grabbed his CB. Any trucks who were in that fog bank, back around mile marker 90, come back. Silence. He tried again. No response. Either the other drivers had already cleared the area, or something else had happened to them. Raymond forced himself to continue driving. He completed his delivery in Johnson City, then immediately searched online for any reports of unusual fog or accidents on I-26 that morning. He found nothing. Weather reports mentioned routine morning fog in the mountain valleys. Nothing exceptional. No accidents. No other drivers reporting strange phenomena. But 3 days later, Raymond received a call from his company's safety manager. 2 drivers had failed to complete their routes on April 6th. Both had been driving I-26 through the mountain section during the early morning fog. Their trucks had been found abandoned on the roadside, engines running, cargo intact. The drivers were never found. The safety manager asked if Raymond had seen anything unusual during his run that morning. Raymond opened his mouth to tell the truth, then closed it. Who would believe him? What would he even say? That the fog had faces, that figures made of mist had surrounded his truck, that he'd driven through one and heard whispers from somewhere beyond normal reality. Nothing unusual, Raymond finally said. Just heavy fog. I took it slow and careful. Good, the safety manager said. Keep doing that. Raymond hung up and sat in silence, thinking about those 2 other drivers. He imagined their trucks moving through fog that pressed closer and closer. He imagined them seeing the faces, hearing the whispers, feeling the temperature drop. He imagined them making a different decision than he had, stopping their trucks, maybe stepping out to investigate, or perhaps just being in the wrong place when the fog decided to take, rather than just observe. Raymond never drove I-26 through that valley section in the early morning again. He requested route changes, timing adjustments, anything to avoid that stretch during fog-prone hours. His company accommodated the requests without question. Maybe they suspected more than they said. Maybe other drivers had made similar requests. Sometimes, on foggy mornings, even far from the mountains, Raymond stands at his window and watches the mist move. He looks for patterns in the swirling white, for configurations that might suggest faces. He hasn't seen them again, and he's grateful for that. But he knows they're there, in fog banks across the mountains, waiting in the white spaces between visibility and blindness. And he wonders about those 2 drivers who disappeared. Are they dead or somewhere else? Did the fog take them physically, or did something else happen? A crossing over into whatever realm those faces inhabited? Raymond doesn't know, and he's deeply grateful he doesn't have to find out. The fog is just water vapor, meteorologists say. Condensation in cool air. Nothing mysterious, nothing supernatural. But Raymond Torres knows differently. He knows that sometimes the fog looks back, and sometimes it reaches out, and sometimes it takes. Story 6. The radio station that broadcast from nowhere. Kevin Walsh had been a dedicated overnight driver for 11 years, specializing in routes through the Appalachian region, where traffic was light and highways were empty. On May 15, 2023, somewhere along US 19 in West Virginia, Kevin's radio picked up a broadcast from a station that didn't exist, playing music from a year that hadn't happened yet, and delivering news reports about events that no one could remember. Kevin had left Charleston at 11:45 p.m., heading north with a load of medical equipment destined for Morgantown. The night was clear and cool, perfect driving weather, with a quarter moon providing enough ambient light to see the mountain silhouettes against the sky. Kevin's radio was tuned to a classic rock station out of Charleston, static-free reception for the first hour, gradually degrading as distance increased and mountains interfered with the signal. Around 1:30 a.m., somewhere between Sutton and Flatwoods, the classic rock station faded into static. Kevin reached for the scan button, letting his radio search for a clear signal. The frequencies rolled past, country music fading in and out, talk radio discussing politics, religious programming, more country. Then the scan stopped on 94.7 FM. A woman's voice, smooth and professional. And that was Electric Dreams by The Mirrors from their 2024 album Synthetic Hearts. Here on WMTN, bringing you the best alternative rock through the mountains. I'm Jennifer Kane, and you're listening to Night Drive on this beautiful May evening. The time is 1:33 a.m. Temperature is a comfortable 58 degrees in Blackwood Hollow. Coming up, we'll hear from The Echoing Green, Phantom Frequency, and Neon Ghosts. But first, let's check in with traffic and weather. Kevin frowned. The Mirrors. He'd never heard of them, but that wasn't unusual. New bands appeared constantly. But the DJ had said the song was from a 2024 album. It was currently May 2023. An album from 2024 couldn't exist yet. Maybe he'd misheard. Kevin kept the station tuned in as a weather report came on, delivered by a calm male voice. Current conditions across our listening area show clear skies and mild temperatures. We're looking at pleasant overnight conditions, with fog possible in the river valleys by dawn. Tomorrow's high will reach 73 degrees with sunny skies. Perfect spring weather for outdoor activities. This is WMTN weather, keeping you informed through the mountains. Nothing unusual there. Kevin settled back, listening as the station came back to music. An indie rock song with a good beat and interesting lyrics about digital consciousness. The sound quality was exceptional, no static at all, despite the mountainous terrain that usually made FM reception challenging. After the song, the DJ returned. That was Ghost in the Machine by Neon Ghosts, off their upcoming release. Love that track. Now let's check the news at the top of the hour. A different voice, authoritative and measured. WMTN News at 2 a.m. Our top story tonight. Federal investigators continue searching for answers in the disappearance of 47 trucks along the Appalachian highway system over the past 3 months. The vehicles, all belonging to independent operators, were found abandoned with no signs of their drivers. Transportation officials have established a task force to investigate the pattern of disappearances, which authorities are now calling unprecedented in American transportation history. Kevin's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd heard nothing about missing trucks, and that was exactly the kind of news that would spread through the trucking community like wildfire. 47 trucks. That would be national news, not a small mountain radio station story. The news continued. In international news, tensions continue to rise following last week's incident in the Taiwan Strait. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve announced today that inflation has reached. Kevin tuned out the economic details, his mind fixed on the missing truck story. When the news ended, the DJ came back on. Heavy stuff tonight. If you're out there driving through the mountains alone, stay safe, stay alert. We're here to keep you company through the long hours. Next up, a special request from Sarah in Elkins. Kevin grabbed his phone and searched for WMTN Radio West Virginia. The search returned nothing. No station by that call sign in West Virginia. No station broadcasting at 94.7 FM in this area. He tried 47 missing trucks Appalachian highways. No results. Trucks disappearing West Virginia 2023. Nothing. He picked up his CB radio. Any drivers near Flatwoods on 19? You picking up this station at 94.7 FM? No response. He tried again. Silence. According to his CB, there should be at least some traffic in this area, even at 2 a.m. But the channels were dead. Not static, just empty silence. Kevin looked at his phone again. No signal. That was strange. He'd had 3 bars just minutes ago. His GPS was still working, showing his position on US 19 heading north. But the map around his location looked wrong. The highway configuration didn't quite match his memory, and some of the town names seemed unfamiliar. WMTN continued playing music. Good music, high-quality production, but all from artists Kevin had never heard of. Between songs, the DJ made references to events and cultural touchstones that didn't quite align with Kevin's knowledge. She mentioned a movie that was supposedly a huge summer blockbuster, but Kevin had never heard of it. She referenced a political scandal involving a senator whose name Kevin didn't recognize. Then at 2:47 a.m., the DJ said something that made Kevin's blood run cold. Before we go to our next track, I want to send out special thoughts to any drivers listening who might be feeling displaced. If the road doesn't quite look right, if your GPS is showing strange things, if you're not entirely sure where you are or when you are, just keep driving. The highway will find its way back. It always does, eventually. And if it doesn't, well, we'll be here, playing music in the spaces between, keeping you company in the nowhere places. Kevin felt like the DJ was speaking directly to him. He checked his mirrors. The highway behind him was empty, no headlights in either direction. Ahead, his headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a road that looked simultaneously familiar and wrong. The paint seemed fresher than he remembered. The mile markers were in a different style, and the mountains on either side had shapes that didn't quite match his mental map of the route. That was a little cryptic, I know, the DJ continued, her voice warm and somehow sad. But some of you out there understand what I mean. You felt it, the shift, the slip, the moment when the road becomes something other than what you expected. Maybe you took a turn that shouldn't exist, or drove through fog that changed everything, or just found yourself on a highway that doesn't quite match your memory. You're not alone. We see you. We're here with you, in the between places. Kevin wanted to turn the radio off, but he couldn't make his hand reach for the button. Instead, he listened as WMTN played another song, this one with lyrics about travelers lost between worlds, highways that exist in no mapped location, and the loneliness of being nowhere. When the song ended, the news returned. WMTN News at 3 a.m. In our continuing coverage of the missing truck driver phenomenon, authorities report that several abandoned vehicles showed unusual anomalies. Dashboard clocks were stopped at seemingly random times. GPS devices showed impossible locations, and in several cases, handwritten notes were found suggesting the drivers had become disoriented about their location and time. One note, found in a truck discovered near Sutton, West Virginia, read, "The highway looks wrong. The mile markers don't match. I've been driving north for 3 hours but haven't passed any towns. The radio keeps playing music I've never heard. I don't think I'm where I'm supposed to be. If someone finds this..." The note ended there. Kevin pulled over onto the shoulder so abruptly that his trailer fishtailed. He sat with the engine idling, breathing hard. Sutton, West Virginia. That was where he was, more or less. Near Sutton. And a truck had been found there with a note describing exactly what Kevin was experiencing. He grabbed his CB again. "This is Kevin Walsh on US 19 near Sutton. If anyone can hear me, please respond." Nothing. "I don't know what's happening, but I'm..." He stopped, unsure what to say. "I'm lost. I'm in the wrong place. I'm listening to a radio station from the future broadcasting news about missing trucks that include me." WMTN's DJ spoke again. "Kevin, I know you're listening. I can see you've pulled over. That's okay. Take a moment. Catch your breath. But you need to keep driving. That's the rule here. Keep moving. The moment you stop for too long, you become fixed in this space. You become a permanent part of the between. And you don't want that, Kevin. Trust me." Kevin stared at his radio in horror. She'd said his name. She'd known he'd pulled over. Which meant this wasn't a normal broadcast. This was something interacting with him specifically, seeing him somehow. "I know you're scared," the DJ continued, her voice gentle. "Everyone is when they first realize where they are. But you can get back, Kevin. Start driving. Head north. Keep your speed steady. Don't stop again, no matter what you see or hear. In about 27 minutes, you'll pass through a section where the road curves around a large rock outcropping. On the other side of that curve, you'll be back. The highway will be normal again. Your phone will get signal. The radio will pick up regular stations. Just keep driving until then." Kevin's hands shook as he put the truck back in gear. He pulled onto the highway and accelerated to 55 miles per hour. The radio station continued playing music, melancholy songs about distance and displacement, and the strange spaces between one place and another. At 3:17 a.m., Kevin saw the rock outcropping the DJ had mentioned, a massive limestone formation that forced the highway into a sharp curve. He navigated the turn carefully, and as he came around the outcropping, everything changed. The wrongness vanished. Suddenly, the highway looked exactly right. The mountain shapes matched his memory, and the mile markers were the familiar green and white signs he'd been seeing for years. His phone buzzed with a flood of notifications, text messages, missed call alerts, app updates, everything that had been queued while he had no signal. His radio dissolved into static. Kevin quickly hit the scan button, and this time it picked up a familiar country station out of Weston. Normal music, normal commercials, normal DJ banter. Kevin drove for another 10 minutes before pulling into a rest area. He sat in the parking lot as his hands gradually stopped trembling. He pulled up his phone and searched again for WMTN radio. Still nothing. Kevin Walsh missing truck. No results. 47 missing trucks, West Virginia. Nothing. But when he searched for unexplained truck disappearances Appalachia, he found dozens of forum posts, chat rooms, and blog entries from drivers describing similar experiences. Highways that didn't match their GPS. Radio stations that broadcast news about missing trucks. DJs who knew their names and gave them directions back to the normal world. One post, dated 3 weeks earlier, was from a driver named Robert Chen. Got lost somewhere on US 19 in WA. Radio station called WMTN gave me directions back. DJ knew my name. I don't understand what happened, but I'm not driving that route again. Another, from a driver named Angela Martinez. Something's wrong with the roads through the mountains. I was missing for 6 hours, but my clock said only 30 minutes passed. Keep hearing about other drivers who disappeared completely. Be careful out there. Kevin sat in that rest area until dawn, reading post after post from drivers describing similar experiences. Not all of them had made it back. Some had left final posts about radio stations that knew too much, highways that went nowhere, and the growing suspicion that they'd never find their way home. Kevin completed his delivery to Morgantown, then requested a route change. He told his dispatcher it was for personal reasons, and maybe that was true. The Appalachian mountain routes paid better, but Kevin no longer cared about the money. He'd driven through the between places once, and made it back. He wasn't willing to risk it again, but sometimes, late at night when he's driving through empty areas, Kevin's radio will briefly pick up WMTN. Just a few seconds, a snatch of music, a fragment of the DJ's voice. "Stay safe out there, Kevin," she'll say. "The between places are always waiting. But you found your way back once. Remember how. You might need it again." Then the station fades, leaving only static and the haunting possibility that next time Kevin drives through certain sections of highway, he might not make the curve that leads back to the normal world. He might become one of the statistics the radio reports about, one of the drivers who disappeared into the spaces between one place and another, listening forever to music from years that haven't happened yet. Story 7. The Convoy That Followed. Mitchell Hartley had been driving solo for 23 years, preferring the independence of single truck operations over team driving or company fleets. On August 8, 2018, driving US 421 through the mountains of Kentucky near the Tennessee border, Mitchell discovered that some convoys on dark highways aren't formed by drivers coordinating over CB radio. They're formed by something else. And once you join, leaving becomes impossible. Mitchell departed from Middlesboro at 10:15 p.m. with a load of furniture heading to Lexington, a routine run he'd made at least 50 times. The night was warm and humid, with scattered clouds blocking the stars, and a thick, oppressive darkness that made his headlights seem inadequate. US 421 wound through the mountains in a series of grades and curves, and Mitchell knew every switchback and overlook. Around 11:40 p.m., approaching a small town called Harlan, Mitchell noticed headlights behind him. Another truck, maybe a quarter-mile back, traveling the same direction. Nothing unusual. Trucks traveled 421 regularly. But after a few minutes, Mitchell noticed the following truck maintained exactly the same distance behind him. When Mitchell sped up on straight sections, the truck sped up. When Mitchell slowed for curves, so did the truck. Perfect spacing, as if they were linked by an invisible tether. Mitchell picked up his CB. "Truck following me southbound on 421. Come back. You want to pass?" No response. He tried again. Silence. The truck behind him continued maintaining that precise quarter-mile distance. After 15 minutes, a third truck appeared in Mitchell's mirrors, falling in behind the second truck. Then a fourth, then a fifth. Within half an hour, Mitchell was leading a convoy of 12 trucks, all maintaining exact spacing, all traveling in perfect coordination. None of them responded to CB calls. None of them passed. They just followed, a line of headlights stretching back into the darkness. Mitchell felt increasingly uneasy. Convoys happened, sure, but spontaneous convoys of 12 trucks that didn't communicate. That was unusual. He decided to test them. He slowed to 45 miles per hour on a straight section where the speed limit was 60. The trucks behind him slowed as well, maintaining distance. He accelerated to 70. So did they. He hit his brakes hard, dropping his speed suddenly. The convoy behind him matched his deceleration perfectly, as if they'd anticipated his actions. That was when Mitchell realized something was very wrong. There was no way those drivers could have reacted so quickly to his braking. The trucks behind him had started slowing at the exact same instant he'd touched his brake pedal. Not a second later, not even a fraction of a second, but simultaneously. As if they knew what he was going to do before he did it. Mitchell tried the CB again. "This is the truck at the front of the convoy on 421 South. I don't know what's going on, but y'all are making me nervous. Please identify yourselves." Static. If someone's playing a joke, it's not funny. Come back. Nothing. The convoy continued following Mitchell through the dark mountains. He checked his mirrors constantly, watching the line of headlights. Something about them looked wrong. The light was too uniform, too white, lacking the slightly yellow cast of normal truck headlights. And the spacing was impossibly perfect, exactly the same distance between each truck, as if measured with precision instruments. Around 12:30 a.m., Mitchell approached a section where the highway narrowed to one lane in each direction, following a cliff face. A pull-off area ahead provided space for slower vehicles to let others pass. Mitchell decided to pull over and let the convoy go by. Maybe once they passed, he could get a look at them, see what was going on. He activated his turn signal and pulled into the pull-off. His truck came to a stop. He waited, watching his mirrors, expecting the convoy to pass. They didn't pass. Instead, all 12 trucks pulled into the pull-off behind him, maintaining their perfect spacing, and stopped. 12 trucks lined up behind Mitchell's in the narrow pull-off, engines idling, headlights blazing. Mitchell's heart began racing. This was beyond strange. This was threatening. He grabbed his CB. "What do you want? Why are you following me?" For the first time, his CB crackled to life. A voice came through, toneless, flat, almost mechanical. "Lead." "What?" Mitchell responded. "Lead what?" "The convoy requires a lead vehicle. You are the lead vehicle. Continue driving." "I don't want to lead any convoy. Pass me and go on your way." "Impossible. The convoy requires a lead vehicle. You were selected. Continue driving." Mitchell felt cold despite the warm night. Selected by who? What is this? Continue driving. The voice offered nothing more. Mitchell considered his options. He could refuse to move, but what would happen then? The trucks behind him weren't going to leave. They'd made that clear. He could call the police, but what would he say? "Some trucks are following me," sounded paranoid and ridiculous. And he wasn't sure his phone would even work in this remote area. With no good alternatives, Mitchell put his truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. Instantly, the convoy followed, falling back into perfect formation. Mitchell tried varying his speed randomly, speeding up, slowing down, changing pace unpredictably. The convoy matched his every variation with impossible precision. For the next hour, Mitchell led the convoy through the dark mountains, his mind racing. The voice on the CB had said he'd been selected, but selected for what? And by whom? He tried engaging the voice in conversation multiple times, but it only repeated the same instructions. Continue driving. Around 2:15 a.m., Mitchell noticed something that made his blood run cold. The road ahead looked wrong. He'd driven this section countless times, and the curve patterns weren't matching his memory. The highway should veer left around a mountain, but instead it went straight. A mile marker read 135, but according to his mental map, there was no mile marker 135 on this section of 421. His GPS showed nothing but a gray screen. His phone had no signal. The only certainty was the road ahead and the convoy behind, following with mechanical precision. Then Mitchell saw other vehicles ahead. Not cars or trucks, but the same convoy he was leading. 12 trucks, traveling in perfect formation, with a lead truck that looked exactly like Mitchell's Peterbilt. Mitchell slowed, staring in disbelief. The convoy ahead maintained its speed, and as Mitchell watched, it disappeared around a curve. But that was impossible. That was him. That was his convoy. Which meant, "You're now seeing the truth," the voice crackled over the CB. "The convoy exists outside normal time. You lead, and you follow simultaneously. The road loops through itself here. This is the route the convoy travels, a circuit through the mountains that has no beginning and no end." "Let me out," Mitchell said, his voice shaking. "I don't want to be part of this. Let me go." The convoy requires a lead vehicle. You were selected because you drive this route regularly. You know the roads. You are suitable. Suitable for what? What happens if I just stop? What happens if I pull over and refuse to drive? Silence for a long moment. Then, previous lead vehicles who stopped are still stopped. They remain in their trucks, pulled over on the roadside, engines idling, waiting. They exist outside time, outside reality. They sit forever, unable to move forward or back. This is not recommended. Mitchell felt sick. The voice was describing some kind of temporal trap. Trucks frozen in eternal waiting, their drivers suspended in a moment that never ends. How do I get out? There has to be a way out. There is. When the convoy completes the circuit, there is a moment, a single moment, when the loop can be broken. A divergence point where normal road and circuit road intersect. You must recognize this moment and choose to exit. If you miss it, the loop continues. You will drive for another cycle. How do I recognize it? You will know. The road will offer two paths. Choose carefully. Mitchell drove in numb silence, leading the impossible convoy through darkness. He'd lost all sense of time. According to his clock, only 3 hours had passed since the convoy began following him, but it felt like days. The road unreeled endlessly before him, sometimes matching his memory of 421, sometimes showing configurations he'd never seen before. Then, ahead, Mitchell saw something different. The highway split, not a normal fork with signs and exit ramps, but a simple divergence where the road became two roads. The left path looked like the circuit road, the endless loop he'd been traveling. It had that same wrong quality, that sense of being outside normal geography. The right path looked ordinary, just regular pavement, regular trees, regular darkness. Nothing special about it, except that it looked real in a way the circuit road didn't. Mitchell made his choice. He jerked the wheel right, taking the ordinary path. His truck swayed as he made the sharp turn, tires squealing. In his mirrors, Mitchell saw the convoy continue straight, following the circuit road. The 12 trucks kept their perfect spacing, their headlights blazing white, and within seconds, they disappeared into the distance. Mitchell pulled over onto the shoulder, his whole body shaking. He sat for a full minute before checking his instruments. His GPS flickered to life, showing his position on US 421, exactly where he should be. His phone showed full signal. His clock read 2:43 a.m., only about 3 hours since the convoy had begun following him. He picked up his CB, scanning through channels. Normal chatter, drivers discussing routes, weather, truck stops, real people having real conversations. "Anyone just see a convoy of 12 trucks on 421? Mitchell transmitted. No one responded. The convoy had vanished completely, returning to whatever circuit it traveled, outside normal time and space. Mitchell completed his run to Lexington in a daze. He delivered his load, then spent 2 days in a motel room, searching online for any information about convoys that followed drivers, about highways that looped through themselves, about trucks trapped in eternal waiting. He found scattered reports, forum posts from drivers describing similar experiences, usually dismissed as sleep-deprived hallucinations or pranks. But one post caught his attention, from a driver named Patricia Wells, dated 4 years earlier. Got caught leading a ghost convoy on 431 in Kentucky. Something on the CB told me I'd been selected. Drove for hours through impossible road configurations. Finally found a divergence point and escaped. Anyone else experience this? I can't be the only one. Mitchell sent Patricia a private message, and they talked on the phone for 2 hours. She'd experienced the exact same phenomenon. The perfect spacing, the mechanical voice, the circuit road, the divergence point. She'd escaped 4 years ago, and never driven 421 again. She knew of 3 other drivers who'd reported similar incidents, all on the same stretch of highway in the Kentucky mountains. "What do you think it is?" Mitchell asked her. "I don't know," Patricia replied. "Something that needs drivers. Something that uses our trucks to travel a route that exists outside normal space. Maybe it's ancient, maybe it's new, but it's real, and it's still out there, selecting drivers to lead the convoy." Mitchell never drove US 421 through that section again. He rerouted all his trips, adding hours and hundreds of miles to avoid that stretch of highway. His income suffered, but he didn't care. He'd led the convoy once and escaped. He wasn't willing to risk being selected a second time. But sometimes, on dark nights when Mitchell is driving through mountain highways, anywhere in the Appalachian range, he'll check his mirrors and count the headlights behind him. 1 truck, 2 trucks, 3 trucks, maintaining perfect spacing. And his hand will reach for the CB, heart pounding, waiting for that flat mechanical voice to tell him he's been selected again, that the convoy requires a lead vehicle, that he must continue driving the circuit road until he finds another divergence point. So far, it's always been normal trucks driven by normal drivers, and Mitchell breathes easier. But he knows the convoy is still out there, traveling its impossible route through the mountains, waiting for new led vehicles. And someday, on some dark highway, Mitchell might check his mirrors and count 12 trucks in perfect formation, and hear that voice telling him to continue driving, and face the choice of whether he can find the divergence point again before the circuit traps him forever in the spaces between one place and another.